Trust me when I tell you, the powers that be around the world right now are literally shitting themselves because they don't know what to do. There is a meeting in Buenos Aires today, the G20, and I promise you, behind closed doors, they are scratching their heads about what to do in Venezuela. I thought I would start today with a quote from someone we all know and love, a former U.S. official that just engenders feelings of warmth and love everywhere you hear the name, Mr. Henry Kissinger. I don't see why we need to stand by and watch a country go communist due to the irresponsibility of its people. The issues are much too important for the Chilean voters to be left to decide for themselves. U.S. National Security Advisor Henry Kissinger, 1970. That was the year I was born. Now, this having been said, they are ready to try to flip the story in Colombia. You see, their elections are coming up this week. And many moons ago, I made videos saying that it's looking like there's going to be this wave sweep through Latin America that's going to give this guy, Mr. Maduro speaking of, a huge support base. And the U.S. is in trouble right now because they failed. They failed, and I'm sure there's some people in the world at G20 going, what the hell, why didn't you take care of this? See, there's this great site here, by the way. I'm going to just go ahead and give you the link. It's http Colombia. I don't even want to pronounce shafakna.com. And it's Colombia news and Latin American news. Excellent source. It's kind of just a clearinghouse. It'll take you to different places, but a lot of great information. But if you look through Colombian news now, they are already trying to tell the world that the elections in Colombia are going to be nothing but a fraud because they're seeing the direction they're going. That they are going to end up going left down there. And please, I'm going to say this again. The difference between left and right down there is not like the difference between left and right up here. So when you hear me say things like right-wing paramilitaries, I'm not talking about people who listen to Rush Limbaugh or Mark Levin or watch Fox News going out that night, picking up a gun and going up and shooting people. It's not what I'm talking about. It's a completely different topic. It kind of is like that, but it's not the same thing. See, they're right, what they call quote-unquote right-wing paramilitaries, they only call them right-wing to give them a distinction from what are the left-wing paramilitaries, the guys that support Maduro, the guys that support a more socialist take on things down there. When really those paramilitaries should be seen as pro-government paramilitaries or cartel paramilitaries. Those are the guys that I'm talking about when I say quote-unquote right-wing paramilitaries. So please don't think that I'm lumping you into that group, because I don't think anybody out there is going to go pick up a gun based on their belief in business principles and start shooting up places they don't believe that way. So that having been said as well, they're already finger pointing in Colombia. And that's the thing that nobody's talking about. If Mr. Maduro were so widely reviled and unpopular in his country, where were all the protests yesterday? Where were all the street riots? Where were all of the people that you saw like a year ago in 2017 that are riding through the streets and throwing smoke bombs? And they talked about them making bombs out of detritus. You didn't see that yesterday, did you? You didn't, because those were troublemakers from Colombia, and the Venezuelan government had systematically thrown them out of the country, and that's why you saw the guard standing by the bridge. And when you got all of the agitators and you got all of the troublemakers, the little tiny group of people that have the big voice, and you know that here in America too, when you saw those protests, it was a little tiny group of people getting a very, very loud voice, a very large voice, trying to make the world believe they're a much bigger group of people than they are. And let me show you this too. I just want to show you this. Now, you would think that Fox would be denouncing this and reviling this and saying this is horrible and oh no, but you can go to their website and it's not even covered. Not on page 1, not anywhere. this issue. And if this weren't the case, you would think, oh, for sure, CNN would love to just rub this in everyone's faces, right? Also, nowhere here will you find this story about Mr. Maduro, not on page 1, not on page 2, and I keep looking for it. I scroll through this 3 or 4 times before the video, and they might change it, but nowhere is this. So this tells you something about these two websites. About they don't want the world to know what really happened yesterday in Venezuela. That's why I said everything's going to change. You watch. They are now already today. We see all these stories that they are talking about how the electoral reform in Colombia is just it's pro-leftist and electoral. The election hasn't even happened yet, and they're already calling fraud. And there's article after article after article about this. Well, that guy looks familiar, doesn't he? Seen a lot of that lately. But this is the story they don't want you to know. This is the story that they're not telling you. That there is a wave going through Latin America. And these people aren't violent, and they're not corrupt. They're just in a position where, and this is a hard thing to explain, and I'll leave the video with this. The U.S. has a luxury that these countries don't. It's called the petrodollar. When you have a voting base of maybe 20 million people, that means 20 million adults, to run your entire country, that's your tax base. You still have to provide military service, Army, Air Force, Navy, Marines, Coast Guard. You have to provide basic services, emergency services, road maintenance, and governments and court offices. All that costs money. And yes, it's on a much smaller scale than you would have in the United States. But the problem is this. When you decide to take a country like Venezuela, and this happened in Chile, you can read about this, and it happened in Argentina, and you decide to overthrow the leftists, overthrow the socialists, and install big business, pro-big business, IMF-loving globalists, the money in the country leaves. Everybody starts spending their money online. Everybody starts buying cheap Chinese goods, because they do. They bring in all of these cheap boatloads of crap, and they fill up all these stores, and they send you the pictures and go, oh, look how much better things are. The store shelves are full, and everything's great and fantastic, and and it is for a minute. It works for a minute, but there's the tax revenue to the government goes in the shitter, and basic services collapse. Because they only have this tiny little tax base. So they have two choices. They can raise taxes to ridiculously high rates, in which case the media always comes out and says, oh, see how terrible these communist socialists, they're raising taxes, terrible. Or everything falls apart, and then they have to do what's called dollarizing their economy, which means that instead of using their own currency, they use the U.S. currency, just like happened down there. And then they basically become a U.S. client state and lose all of their sovereignty. See, the socialist policies that they have in places like Argentina, Colombia, Chile, Bolivia is designed to keep the money created by those particular peoples in that country supporting the governments and supporting the systems necessary in that country. It never used to be a problem before global economy and globalism, because most people didn't have any other option but to go to the local grocery store or go to the local service provider for this, that, and the other. But with the advent of big globalism, when you try to install what you would call pro-US, pro-business friendly policies, it destroys their economies because they lose their base. They lose their money base. Because when you have everybody going to the local store and buying Chinese goods and all that money flies out of the country, when it's a tiny, tiny, tiny country like that, 18 million people, and you don't have your currency being the world reserve currency like ours, where you can just print fiat money and have it magically be given value, the countries collapse. It's happened over and over again. This is why little tiny countries like this really don't have a choice but to maintain a certain level of socialist tenet in their government. Now, of course, they do have businesses where people are out there and selling things and making money and using certain amounts of capitalist principle, but you can't have a for-profit government. And maybe I'll do a video maybe getting into that deeper, but this is what's going on now. The globalists are hating this right now. If you want to really talk about the globalists losing or being defeated on the world stage, look at Venezuela, and very soon look at Colombia, and then eventually Mexico. Because these people are voting for, I know they're going to demonize it in the media and call it socialism and communism to you, but what it really is anti-globalism and pro-sovereignty. So I'll leave it there. Like, share, subscribe. Have a great week.